Okay, so I will officially kick off this meeting because I know that you guys have to be on time and you have to finish sharp at 5 o'clock. So I want to welcome all of you. There will be more guests joining us later on, but my name is Milana Strezeva. I am the Artistic Director of Grand Piano Series, and we are in Naples, Florida. We will have a few participants who are not in Naples, who are not located in Naples. So Vadim, you have fans all over the world, I know that. So they probably will be tuning in as well. And Mark Travis is tuning in from New York City. Mark works at New York Philharmonic, and he is going to present to us a pre-concert lecture that is going to feature all the works that Vadim is going to be playing for us next Monday at the concert here in Naples, Florida. Thank you. Mark, go ahead.
Sure. Well, my pleasure. And let me just say it's great to be with the Naples community again, if only from a distance. How I wish I was in Florida with you right now. It still remains the last flight that I took was on my way home from one of the Grand Piano Series concerts in March. So that's the last time I've been on an airplane, which is stunning for, this medallion holder for, a normal frequent flyer. I'm so happy we can connect this way. And Vadim, I love this program that you have assembled. Of course, with my background being in broadcast and radio for so many years, I love looking at programs and kind of immediately seeing the ways in which they come together. And so, I will probably suggest some connections, and I hope, Vadim, that you will, chime in if I'm completely off and say, Mark, what planet are you on? I just see it as this. But, I think one thing as we look at the composers that are represented on this program is that these are all composers who didn't just do one thing well, but they did a lot of things well. They expressed themselves in many, many different voices and really had a lot of different musical identities. And that sort of begins with the first composer that's on the program. We'll hear the Suite Italienne of Igor Stravinsky. And, Stravinsky, of course, we think of Rite of Spring and, we think of him as this modernist composer, but the reality is that, he composed in many different genres over the course of his career. And a very important phase, in Stravinsky's writing, and one that went on to inspire, I think, other composers is, of course, what we call his neoclassical period. Now, what do we mean by that? Neoclassical, this is the idea that he adopts earlier forms. He's not necessarily trying to shock us with, strange tonality and what have you, atonality, I should say. But instead, he is giving himself the challenge of expressing himself in these earlier musical models. And this is something that, we see plenty of evidence of throughout, many of the great composers throughout history. But in Stravinsky, in the case of the Suite Italienne, I love that not only is it neoclassical by its musical language, but it's really neoclassical in the whole form and the whole philosophy and the way in which it's used. So this is a piece that actually is a retelling or, reworking of themes and music from his ballet, his one-act ballet, Pulcinella. Pulcinella was in turn kind of based on models from Commedia dell'arte. And, so his approach to it was very deliberate. And then I love the fact that he adapts it to other forms, because this is also something that we see a lot of, with great composers. Bach, of course, borrowed melodies from himself. Mozart was always, poaching a few notes of an aria or, a lick of, a clarinet solo to be expressed in some other place in his music. Famously, Vivaldi, we always said he wrote the same concerto 50 times, for different forces and different instruments. So this is a model where it's, I think, fascinating to see this music adapted in the way that Stravinsky does in this suite, because of course then it also helps us see that it gives us another view into the genius of the composer, where we're not just seeing this big orchestration, but maybe we focus just a little bit more on the melody, and we can focus on the dialogue of those parts as we hear them in the violin and in the piano. So I would like to hear just a little bit of this. Again, this is not the Stravinsky of The Rite of Spring. Clear our minds of any visions of Stravinsky and dinosaurs. From Fantasia, duking it out. This is a much more subdued and much more classical Stravinsky. So here's just a little taste of what you have in store for you. Actually, this is the full piece. So that gives us a pretty good idea of, again, this is a softer side of Stravinsky, a different side of Stravinsky. And if I'm not mistaken, the beginning of the Suite Italienne begins right with that figure, where we, instantly are kind of brought into this other world. I mean, if we listen to that blindly and aren't aware of what this music is, I don't know what composer I would guess, had written it. But what a wonderful way to start a program and just kind of showcase, a masterwork voiced in this different way, for violin and piano, and really showing a different side of the composer. Another very important composer, and one that I fear is sometimes neglected in certain musical circles that follows this, is, of course, Ernst Bloch. Now, Ernst Bloch is a very interesting figure in the world of music and of composition. He lived from 1880 until, I think, 1959. He was actually born in Switzerland, in Geneva, and he died in Portland, Oregon in 1959. He lived a pretty long life, passed away from cancer. He held very important academic distinctions and positions. If I'm not mistaken, he was the first composition composer at Mannes College of Music. So there's, a little bit of a connection for anybody to Mannes School. And then, of course, he was on the composition faculty at the University of California at Berkeley as well later in his life. he's someone that's interesting because there are these three identities. You know, when we describe him, we call him a Swiss-American composer very often because of his immigration to this country. But one of the really important and significant parts of his writing is the way in which he expressed his his Jewish identity. You know, this was something that was very, very important to him. His father thought very seriously, actually, about being a rabbi, and we hear a lot of Jewish themes throughout several of his most important works, and I would say his most beloved works. So we're going to hear one of those, which, you know, I love the subtitle of this, is three scenes in Hasidic life, you know, where, you know, we're going to, you know, get a lot of Hebraic themes in the course of the piece. I was first turned on to Ernest Bloch and his music by a piece called the Concerto Grosso, which I think should be part of the standard repertoire. It's probably not quite there right yet. I happened to be exposed to it because it was the theme music for a piece, for a radio series that I worked on early in my career for WCLV in Cleveland, called Celebration. And Celebration was this idea of celebrating the Jewish element in classical music. And so we would do weeks on, you know, various important figures, you know, both composers and artists. And our theme music was the Concerto Grosso. And I just knew I had never heard anything quite like that before. So just to put us in that world, you know, because I don't necessarily want to invite comparisons to someone else's performance of Baal Shem, you know, with what Vadim is going to do, but I want to put you in the world of Bloch a little bit. So let's hear some of this Concerto Grosso, because I think this is going to be another instance where you're going to hear this and say, wow, I want to hear more. That's my hope. And I can see from his smiling face that might be Vadim's hope as well. Let's hear a little bit of the Concerto Grosso. Of course, we'll have to, there we go. And we'll put this up and hope this is heard better. So I thoroughly encourage everyone to not only check out that work, but also to kind of go in with very open ears and open minds to when you hear another of his works at this recital program. Again, similar to Stravinsky, here Bloch is a figure of the 20th century largely, but, composing in different modes and different models, adapting different styles. And the way that he does this with Hebraic melodies in particular is just fascinating and really comes at it with a legitimacy that some other composers don't. In fact, let's just go ahead and talk about another one of those, because of course on this program, we're going to hear one of the most famous works by Ravel in the Tsigan. And, Tsigan is, everybody else, well, what does this mean? And, it's kind of the European translation of gypsy, of what we, but it's not really, this is not Bartók, this is not Kodály giving us authentic representations of, the Roma people. This is instead what would have been called at that time exoticism. And exoticism took different forms over the course of music history, right? We go back to Mozart's time, and, if any of you have ever seen the film Amadeus, you hear the characters talk about the fact that, Turkish culture and Turkish things, Turkish dress, Turkish dance, Turkish instruments were all the rage. And indeed, the dramaturgy, while the music history value of Amadeus is not great, the actual dramaturgy, meaning the costumes, the sets, and some of the scenes that they set is quite good. And because that was true, Turkish things were very much in favor at that time. And so we hear that in his violin concerto, number 5, the Turkish. We hear this March of the Janissaries. So that was exoticism in Mozart's day. Later, in Wagner's time, Spanish music was considered to be exotic. And we see composers like Bizet and Carmen, and we see, Rimsky-Korsakov and the Rhapsody Espagnole, attempting to have, what we would call Spanish-esque themes. And so this is what Ravel also gives us with Tsigan, where it suggests a certain exoticism of, what was then referred to as gypsy themes or gypsy people, but doesn't do so yet with the authenticity that, say, other composers would do later on. That said, it's a stunningly gorgeous work, and one that has been done in, it has been orchestrated and offered in many different ways. Something that's interesting with this piece is that when it was originally conceived, it was conceived with this idea of a piano that would have an extension put on it called a luteal, meaning that it was almost like an organ-like effect where you would sort of place this on and it would create these other sort of different tones for the piano. And, this is exactly, Ravel was a master orchestrator. And so this is the type of thing that, of course, would have fascinated him. And, why not write for this new technology? Nowadays, we almost never hear it, but I thought maybe this is one instance where I thought it would be curious to hear just a little bit of, what it sounds like with that luteal. This is not going to be the version, but my friend Daniel Hope, of the Beaux-Arts trio, who was in the Beaux-Arts trio, recorded this some years back, and I thought it was worth, just getting a sense of this is sort of what we think Ravel had in mind. So bear with me a moment, and we'll hear a little bit of the luteal extension, the Tsigan. We'll just... So you get a little bit of a sense of it's sort of the piano, but not quite. But it's also just so much in the spirit of Ravel, I think, to, just attempt to write for something like this. But I think we can all be in agreement. We're going to prefer the way that Vadim is going to perform this at the recital, the way in which it will be presented there, along with also the Hebraic Rhapsody as well. I want to talk also just very briefly about Gia Concelli. Gia Concelli is just a stunning composer. So pleased to see him on this program. There too is somebody that wrote in a lot of different forms, wrote work of just such substance and such meaning. He was a Georgian composer, and we actually only lost him in 2019. So definitely, somebody that has had a major impact on 20th and 21st century musical life. And, he has had a handful of champions, of course. Very pleased to see him on this program. The great violist Yuri Bashmet has also been a great champion of his. Lara Auerbach, who, of course, was part of Grand Piano Series, has also been a big champion of his works. Vadim, maybe you could tell us which of them. I know you're doing a program of the miniatures, but I wonder if you could, I certainly have some samples queued up, but I wonder if you could talk to us about which ones that we'll be hearing of this set.
Well, good afternoon to everybody. We will play 3 of the 18 miniatures, number 1, number 6, and number 12. If it were up to me completely, I would play the whole set and then continue to playing his extraordinary piece called Time and Again, which we have recorded long time ago. He's one of those composers that he was never afraid to be himself, and this is what attracts me the most in newer composers, where we all know this unfortunate word trend. Yeah, and there are countless of people writing music, not because they feel they have to, but because they follow a certain fashion or trend, for that matter. Concelli never did that, and that is something that I will follow almost blindly to the end of the earth. The collection of miniatures that we're playing is one that he put together for one of his most important, if not the most important, advocate, Gidon Kremer. And these are themes from his movie scores, movie and theater scores. As you said, every composer on this program wore many hats. And Concelli, of course, to many in the post-Soviet territory, today is known as John Williams of Georgian and even to some extent Soviet movie industry. He was what John Williams is to Steven Spielberg, to an extraordinary Georgian director Georgi Dadelia, and many truly cult movies were produced with his music. We're talking dozens and dozens and dozens of films for which he wrote scores. And these themes are coming from many movies that will be very familiar to myself, to Milana, I'm sure. But one does not need to know these films in order to be connected to this music. It speaks in the most direct way to your heart. He always said that his music is very, very sad and very, very slow. I'm going to disprove him because one of the miniatures is not slow at all, but still quite nostalgic.
That's wonderful. No, he is. I love that you bring up, the fact that he was a film composer, because it was amazing, and not just live action film, as it were, too, but very famously some animated films as well. So those are things too to be thinking about. I always say that the few opportunities I've had to work with his music or produce recordings, you can't have a reverberant enough space to kind of exist around these very clear, very direct, almost melancholic at times, but always just somehow clear musical thoughts, that he creates. It's just, it does exist in kind of, there's a mystical quality to it. I don't know that there's any other way to really describe it.
Absolutely. For those who might be not quite set in their mind about modern music, be prepared to fall in love with modern music.
Yeah, I agree. I'm happy to take a few questions, or do if there are any, or anybody else would. Milana, if you have anything you'd like to ask, or
well, we can transition into Vadim's life,
Sure.
with this. And Vadim, you grew up in the Soviet Union. I also grew up in the Soviet Union. I grew up in Moldova, and from what I understood, you were born in Ukraine. Is that correct?
That's very true. I have to immediately put a question to the term "growing up."
I was born.
I would maybe apply that, but also in my case, I came to Israel. My family came to Israel when I was 16 years old. Is that considered to be grown up? I have a 17 years old daughter. I still have my questions.
Well, maybe as a parent now you're looking at it differently, right? but
when I was 16, I was absolutely grown up. I knew better than anybody else.
So you moved from Ukraine with your parents, correct? And what brought you to Riga? Did you move, right?
Yeah, we were very much like gypsies. My family lived in many places, partly for studying, for work reasons, and then for health reasons. So we lived in Ukraine. The family comes from Ukraine, but then my parents moved to Siberia. I lived for the first year of my life there, or 2 years, and then we came to Riga, and this is where I became acquainted with myself, basically. And from Riga, we left for Israel in 1990.
Mm-hmm. So both of your parents are musicians. Is that
very much so?
Yeah. So how was it growing up in a household with two parents who were...
I will give you, I'm 47, I'll give you an example of something that happened, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or so, less. By this time I've played with a couple of important conductors and a few orchestras and made several recordings. And I'm standing, this is in Israel, and I'm standing on the top floor of our family home, learning something alla prima vista, reading from for the first time a piece. And my mother is preparing dinner in the kitchen. And while cutting a salad, she's screaming so I can hear her in the third floor, out of tune! So if this happens when I'm almost 40, you can multiply it several times in geometrical progression and imagine my childhood.
Yeah, no, I can very much relate to that because I also have, both parents are musicians. My father was a clarinet player in the opera house and mom was a singer. So I definitely understand. So growing up in Riga, that's where would you say that your most important part of your violin studies were happening at that time there, or?
I did go at the very end of my Soviet existence. I wouldn't want to call it life. I did go for a year to study back to Siberia, to Novosibirsk, and I studied with Zahar Bron for literally 9 months. But I think that the crucial part of violin education, musical education, up until leaving from Soviet Union, certainly happened at Riga. My first teacher, the older I get, the more appreciative I am of him and more grateful I am for what he did. He is still teaching in that same room where I went. He's going to be 90 next month.
Incredible. That's really incredible. So if you had to summarize it for your students, what are some of the most important learning elements as a child from your first teacher? What would you say? Just the highlights, I would say. Please.
Well, I can certainly summarize it for teachers. Looking back at my teacher and projecting what kind of horrific student I was. Ability to have patience and to not to give up on a student. That is something. I don't have much advice for kids. I was not a good student. Not at all, actually, and it is thanks to him in large part and his absolutely endless patience that I became a violinist.
When you say you were not a good student, is that because you were rebelling against what he was saying, or you just refused practicing?
Yes, and yes, and yes, and there were many other avenues that I used, unfortunately. But then at the same time, I think it is natural. Growing up in a Soviet system, as I'm sure you remember, we were expected to be professional musicians at age 7. You were given violin, and you were told you're not learning violin. You are a violinist. Well, I didn't want to be a violinist. I wanted to play soccer in my yard. And I think it's completely natural. It would be extraordinarily strange if I wanted to practice violin, play scales and double stops and whatnot for 5 hours a day, as I was expected to do.
Right. No, that's excellent point, and I completely relate to that. Yeah. Vadim, so you're coming here to play on our series with your wife. And when I met you at Juilliard School in 94, it must have been 94 because that's, 96.
I started in 95.
Okay, so 96 is when I arrived. Yeah. And I met, and I remember you guys so well. You were just so kind to all the freshmen that arrived. How long did you know each other by then, and you've been together?
Well, we've known each other basically all our lives. Our parents were friends back in the old country, and we went to the same school in Riga, and she actually accompanied me on my last recital in Riga before leaving for Israel. And then her family, we lived in 1990, her family arrived a year or so later. It didn't take long.
No, that's incredible, because I think for many of our audience members, it would be interesting, to know that you really knew each other since you were little kids, and you've played together since then. And I'm sure it definitely affects ensemble. Being a chamber musician myself, I know, that with some souls you connect immediately, right? So it must have been that you immediately connected with her, because.
It takes time, as I'm sure you know. Nothing happens overnight, or almost nothing happens overnight. It takes years of growing into each other, musically speaking. It's not something that happens immediately. But of course, now that we've been playing together, oh my gosh, for 30 years basically, there are certain things that come almost, you can call them naturally, because we don't need to talk about them. They're built into our system by now.
Right.
But there are certain things that we still fight for or about, and in a very loud fashion.
Well, that usually happens between family members. I mean, me and my mother, we can't rehearse without fighting. So that's yeah. But maybe it's also the dynamic of daughter and mother, which is another aspect.
I am a witness to that as well.
Right. So, Vadim, what brought you to America when you came first to America?
So my family came to Israel and they started studying. And one day, I was told that Peter Zuckerman is listening to young kids, and the American Israel Cultural Foundation, of which I was a recipient. They called me and said, "Why don't you go play with him?" I did, and he invited me to come to Dallas to work with him in the summer festival. And I gladly accepted, of course, went, and the first week or so, he was not yet scheduled to be at the festival, so I took lessons with other faculty members. And after a lesson with somebody called Arkady Fomin, who was actually from Riga, but many, many years before me, he left from Riga in 1970s to the States. After that lesson, I remember myself sitting on the floor, which is a very Israeli thing to do, and told him that I don't know how or what needs to be done, but I'm going to study with you. And half a year later, I was in Dallas. By that time, Angela decided that she wants to join me as well, and there was an amazing piano professor who is still teaching there, Flokina Chukarov. He is the teacher of Alessio Bachs, among many others. Alessio was a 16 years old prodigy that was absolutely amazing. That's how we came to the States. And then when we were graduating, Arkady, who by that time became not only my teacher, but kind of a second father to both of us, he suggested that it's time to go and study with Miss DeLay. He called her up, and then you met me in July.
No, that's great. So violin is a very big element in violinist journey, and not many violinists can afford to have a good instrument, And what are your thoughts on that? And I know you have a very special instrument right now. Are you still using the Stradivari?
Yes, I do. It's right here. I've played this violin longer than any instrument I've ever had in my life. It's been well over 20 years now. Not being able to afford great instruments, this is not, unfortunately, this is not new. It has been like this for years. The prices of rare instruments have gone to absolutely tremendous heights. We're talking dozens of millions of dollars for the most expensive instruments. This violin, this is Antonio Stradivari, the young lady was made in 1690, and it's on loan to me from an organization here in Chicago called the Stradivari Society. I've been a recipient, as I said, for over 20 years now. I'm some sort of an artistic advisor trying to help to find the next generation of recipients, to choose them. But this is it's an amazing institution. They realized early on how impossible and at the same time important it was to have, especially for a young soloist, for a young musician just beginning his or her career, to have a great instrument, to serve them, to support them. And they started this organization. Midori was one of the first recipients, and the rest is history.
How does it work? Is there an expiration date on how many years you can actually use the instrument? Do they, or if you have to be, if you're not nice to them, the instrument is taken away from you?
Well, I think it's fair to expect you to be nice to people who do something good to you. I wouldn't see anything strange in that. There is no code of rules. I guess the recipients are using instruments as long as the society sees fit and is convinced of the good reasons to lend the instrument to a particular recipient. Some hold it longer, some shorter periods. It really is very individual, depending on the society. Also, very much depends on the patron, the people who actually own the instrument.
I see. So it's sort of like stakeholders and their group of investors.
Not quite. Society does not own instruments. The society itself. Society only works as a middleman, kind of a matchmaker between those who can afford to invest in these great instruments and those who can play them. Most often, it's not the same person.
Right. No, I ask all these questions because I know we have a few friends who are very interested in these answers. So
I am happy to elaborate.
Yes. Vadim, I also wanted to, before I open it up to our audience to ask questions, I wanted to ask you, how do you choose your program when you have a program that you will be performing? What is the process behind the scenes? I think it's very interesting for audience to kind of get the glimpse behind the scenes.
Well, it's to be honest, this is one of my absolute favorite things to do. To build a program. I mean, next to playing violin, choosing what to play is absolutely. I mean, I can spend hours just sitting in front of a computer or with encyclopedia or whatever it is, just contemplating. It's very similar to being a kid in a toy store. I want this, and a little bit of that. And then I see how and if all that I picked from shelves fits together. Of course, it's not as simple just as that, but I need to have connections between the composers on the program. Otherwise, it becomes meaningless for me personally. And I was very happy to hear Mark mentioning that every composer was more than just a composer, and this was somehow a guiding line in the programming in this case. But there can be many considerations. It depends on occasion. It depends on the kind of presenter, where here kind of audience. What kind of configuration we have, etc., etc., etc. There are so many considerations, but one thing that I don't want to, and I hope I won't ever do that, is to expect that is to think that we're expected to play only the blockbusters, and we cannot trust our audience to experience new things. I respect my audience too much to think that. And introducing new music, I think, is my duty in a way. Of course, I introduce music that I like. I won't make myself play something that I don't believe in. But if I believe in a piece, I think it is my job to at least to give it a chance for others to believe in that piece with me.
No, thank you so much, because that's very important, and very often, I get questions. I was like, well, why didn't you tell him to play this and this and this? And I was like, wait a second. Let's get things straight here. We have an artist who has a vision, and we have to trust them with their vision. So I am really looking forward to this program that you're going to do. Do you have anything to add to Mark's comments about the program?
Well, one comment that I do have, I will put my 2 cents about Lucial. It is not devised to imitate organ. It is devised actually to imitate an instrument called cymbalon. This is an instrument that is played, and it's called very, very similarly in many countries, starting with Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Romania, Hungary, etc., etc. But it's a flat table with strings, and it is played with. They're called spoons actually, but they're kind of mallets. I have played Tsigan with a cymbalon player, a gypsy cymbalon player I think it was in Utrecht in the Netherlands. It was some kind of festival. There was a gypsy band playing before me or after me, I can't remember now. And they asked me, do you know Tsigan? Yeah, I do. Would you play it with us? And without rehearsals, we just went and played it. He played, of course, the whole piano part, basically improvising it. So did the others joining me here and there. This was, I think, in my experience, absolutely the high point of chamber music playing in my life. I've never felt my senses to be so alive, and I've never experienced, or almost never experienced, other people being so attuned to me. It was absolutely stunning. But the sound of the instrument, going back to the subject, is very, very similar to cymbalon. The one you demonstrated with Daniel, to my ears, it was not adjusted properly. Some notes were still sounding like piano, and some were actually sounding like they were plucked. Yeah. Very, very interesting. I know the pianist very well. Next time I see him, I will ask, where did he find it?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry for the mistake. I was thinking stops, and that came out. But yeah, of course, that's
there are stops.
The cymbalom is a big part of, of course, a lot of true Hungarian music. Yeah. But it's a very important distinction.
With this piece in general, I think it's worth mentioning the history how it was created. Ravel attended a concert in London where a great Hungarian violinist and the niece of Joseph Joachim, Zseli Darányi, she premiered Bartók's, I believe it was second sonata. I think it was 1921. I'm terrible with numbers. And Bartók was so impressed, he went up to Ms. Darányi, asked her to play for him more, play Hungarian music. She did, and he proposed that he will write a piece for her that will encompass all the technical challenges of all Paganini caprices in one piece in gypsy Hungarian style. Exactly a year later, they premiered it together in London.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vadim. Now we'll open up to our audience. If you have any questions, we have 10 minutes, so we'll be happy to take some questions. Greg, go ahead.
When you were talking about the violin, I recalled reading you quoted as saying something to the effect of the first time you played the instrument, you felt the presence of Auer behind you, the violinist whose name is attached to the instrument. I was wondering if you could speak as to how that affected you over the years.
Oh boy. Well, actually, first time that I held and played this violin, it happened at the headquarters of Banin Fushi, which is the parent organization of the Divari Society. And in their large, shall we say, showing room or living room, there are portraits of great instrumentalists, great string players from all times. And when I was handed the instrument, the sensation was that someone was staring at me. I have nothing to prove it to you, but when I turned around, there was a humongous portrait of Auer looking at me from the wall. How do we explain it? I have none. We can't measure that. But as far as his legacy is concerned, well, you imagine that number of important pieces were premiered on this violin. Glazunov concerto was premiered. Tchaikovsky concerto was rejected. The present, today's version that we play of Souvenir de France was played on this violin for the first time, etc., etc., etc. I know that there are some pieces that, I call violin she, not it. I just can't. And in my mother tongue, violin is female. She's very happy when she plays certain repertoire, and it's most often it's the repertoire that she must have played back then. For example, Tchaikovsky's piano trio. This is something that she just soars. And each and every time I played, it doesn't matter in what conditions, what climate, violins can be sensitive sometimes. That piece is always very welcomed. But then just simple understanding that young Heifetz was listening to this instrument as an example of how it's done. That's humbling.
That's good. Anybody else has any comments, questions? You can either unmute yourself and ask a question, even if we don't see you, or raise your hand. And David, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself.
We don't hear you.
No.
Lower left corner of your screen.
Oh, I'm getting good at this. Now I've learned how to unmute my mute. Good.
There you go.
Hi, Vadim. Just as a thought, I was reminded when you were talking about playing and I guess getting in a special feeling between you and the one who was playing. I forget what you call the instrument again, but it reminded me of a time when it was Yehudi Menuhin and Ravi Shankar made a record. I don't know, Mark would probably know how many years ago when Ravi was playing the sitar and Yehudi had just sat down and they didn't know each other, and then in moments they made what turned out to be two long records, and that kind of sensation that passes between two great musicians playing instruments that are very far into one or the other, and certainly the music was. And I wonder whether that was sort of what you were describing.
Very much so, except I would say that in case of violin and sitar, it's much further away one from another than violin and cymbalom, because historically violin and cymbalom do play together, at least in folk formations, folk ensembles. Whereas I don't think before Mr. Menuhin arrived in India and played for the first time there, I don't think this combination was ever experienced. So, but in essence, you're absolutely right. That's the sensation where you will probably never be able to recreate it, most likely, and there is no way to explain it. It just happens, and we should be grateful for when it does. That's all.
Great. Anyone else? Any comments? Vadim, we have quite a few of your friends have reached out that they wanted to join. So we have a few people traveling as far away as Miami to join us.
Miami.
Yeah, so it's going to be a happy reunion of friends.
Yes.
So we're definitely looking forward to you being here and very excited about the program. For those of you who are here, Vadim is going to do a masterclass for our young violinist in the area as soon as he lands on Sunday. His flight arrives at 2:40 and he has a masterclass scheduled at 5:30, and we'll just keep our fingers crossed that everything is going to be on time.
Well, considering that I'm flying from Boston, we should hope that weather will be a little bit less of an issue.
if something happens, if there's a delay, we will do it in Zoom later on, so that's not an issue. The kids will still get a chance to perform for Vadim. And on Monday, we have a concert that is a live performance. It's a limited capacity. We have 6 foot separation between sitting groups. So if you are comfortable getting out of home and you still don't have tickets, please join us. We still have some great seats available. So we'd love to see you at the concert. And reach out directly. Feel free to email me or call me if you have any questions. And I guess that's it. So thank you so much, Vadim. You probably have a teaching right now, right?
I have to listen to my doctoral student at Peabody. She has come up with an idea for her recital. Let's see what her programming looks like.
Sounds good. I'm so grateful you were able to tune in. And thank you all for joining us. And this recording is going to be available. We'll share it with our patrons also to see later. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.